This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. The scandal-plagued New York Republican Congressmember George Santos pleaded not guilty to 13 federal charges at a courthouse in Long Island Wednesday. He faces 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, 2 counts of lying on federal disclosure forms, and 1 count of fraudulently collecting unemployment benefits. Santos spoke to reporters after he was released on a $500,000 bond just hours after turning himself in to the Central Islip Court.
I'm going to fight the witch hunt. I'm going to take care of clearing my name, and I look forward to doing that.
Why would you apply for unemployment benefits when you had a job making $120,000 a year?
Rachel, this is part of my defense. This is inaccurate information, and I will get to clear my name on this. During the pandemic, it wasn't very clear. I don't understand where the government's getting their information, but I will present my facts.
So you were confused? Prosecutors say that you got over $20,000 in unemployment benefits, sir. How is that acceptable?
Ma'am, like I said, my employment was changed during the time. I don't understand where the government's coming from. I'll present my defense to that.
After a successful 2022 campaign for Congress, Santos, if that's his name, was exposed as a serial liar who fabricated his educational background, employment history, and religion. About a dozen House and Senate Republicans have called for Santos to resign, including a number of Republicans. But that doesn't include Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who said he'll wait to see if Santos is convicted. McCarthy spoke to CNN's Manu Raju Wednesday.
Santos said today he's running for re-election. Are you going to support him?
No, I'm not going to support Santos.
You're not? Okay. So will you work to try to defeat him in the primary?
Santos has a lot going on. But I think he has other things to focus on his life than running for president.
So you don't plan to support Santos for re-election?
That's what I said.
Republican leaders see Santos's vote as crucial in the House, where the party holds a slim 4-vote majority. If convicted, Santos could face up to 20 years in prison. Another criminal case is looming against Santos in Brazil, where he faces a hearing today on an allegation of check fraud. Meanwhile, in another case involving Santos, CREW, that's Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, filed a complaint Wednesday with the Federal Election Commission that says Santos's currently listed campaign treasurer may not exist. CREW President Noah Bookbinder said, "No one can seem to find Andrew Olson. If he doesn't exist, it would be an extreme abuse of our campaign finance system, one the FEC should not permit." For more on all this, we're joined by Mother Jones reporter Noah Lanard, who is in the courtroom in Central Islip as Santos pleaded not guilty. His latest piece is headlined, "Santos Indictment Leaves Many Lies, Mysteries, and Scandals Unaddressed." Earlier this year, Noah and reporter David Korn did a story headlined, "We tried to call the top donors to George Santos's 2020 campaign. Many don't seem to exist." Noah Lanard, welcome to Democracy Now! Just lay out both what happened in court yesterday, you were there on Long Island, and then what you have found in your investigations of this lying Long Island Congressmember.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. So, yes, I was in the courtroom yesterday. Santos was arraigned. He had U.S. Marshals behind him. He pleaded not guilty to all the counts with his lawyer, Joe Murray there, and then there was $500,000 bond posted, and then they went to some other details. He surrendered his passports, for example. He's no longer allowed to travel outside of Long Island, New York, or D.C. Without the government's approval prior to, and then it was a very quick hearing. He left the courtroom, and there was just a huge media scrum, dozens, scores of reporters swarming him, and then the clips that you played earlier in the show. But what we found earlier in the year was that, like so much of his story, so many of the things he's done are blatantly, not what normal candidates do. Many of his donors don't seem to exist. And what's amazing about this indictment is they've managed, the federal prosecutors have a very strong 13-count indictment, but it still doesn't even address many of the biggest mysteries about him. I spoke with Santos's lawyer, Joe Murray, after the hearing, and I asked him about the possibility of a follow-up indictment with additional charges, and he said that sometimes does happen. I wouldn't be surprised to see that here, because what you don't see in this indictment is a lot of the things related to his campaign finance practices. We still don't know where he got the more than $700,000 he loaned his campaign, where that money came from. Did he even loan that money to his campaign? So there are a lot of things we still don't know that we'll be finding out potentially in future indictments.
And Noah, what about the fact that this bond, $500,000, where did that come from?
So it's my understanding it's an unsecured bond. He also has 3 people, shorters, who are, endorsing it. So he's out now, but yes, he's basically very limited. He can only go between New York and D.C. He's voluntarily agreed to those conditions for now.
So I want to ask you about what he means in the House, that Kevin McCarthy still has his arms basically wrapped around him. He needs him. Yes, the Republicans have a 4-vote majority, but when it came down to the debt ceiling vote, he was the deciding vote, 1 vote. That was Representative George Santos, or whoever he is. Can you talk about his significance in the House and what the House could do? I mean, the local conservative Republican Long Island Congress members, not to mention the majority of Republicans in his district, have called for him to resign.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a nice arrangement that's working out right now where, basically you have particularly downstate New York City area and Long Island Republicans, very strongly calling for him to resign. This is a huge embarrassment for them. They know they're running for re-election next year, and they do not want at all to be associated with George Santos. On the other side, higher up in leadership, McCarthy and other Republicans in House leadership know that they need his vote. They can't afford to not have it. So it seems like there's kind of an arrangement, formally or not, that's been worked out where the downstate Republicans get to say very mean things about Santos and say that he should step down, but at the same time knowing it's really not going to go anywhere, at least for now, at least until potentially a conviction or a plea deal in this case.
And Noel, could you talk about Nancy Marks, George Santos's campaign treasurer, and how she was complicit in what his various forms of criminal behavior?
Yes, I think there's a very important part of the story. She's not in the indictment, which is a pretty obvious thing that is missing, and obviously that's intentional. What's unclear is whether that's because she's talking to federal prosecutors right now or because she's not talking. It could be either. But the key part of it here is that she's the person, other than Santos, who almost certainly knows the most about what was going on with his campaign finance practices. For example, she's the one who signed off on a large series of $199 expenses, which is 1 cent below the federal threshold needed to keep receipts. So she's the person signing off on that. She also had her 19 and 22-year-old children give legal maximum donations of $5,800 to Santos. Many of her relatives did the same. There's no evidence they'd ever given political contributions before Santos's campaign. I spoke to at least one Santos relative who was reported as giving $5,800, and they said that they did not give that donation. So these are things that Marks would have been aware of, and Marks also would have been aware of, or should have been aware of, the fact that she was reporting maximum donations in the 2020 campaign from people who almost certainly don't exist. I mean, for example, they were living at addresses in New York City that don't exist. They had names that nobody in the United States has that name, but in some cases the name was very similar to some of Santos's relatives with just 1 or 2 letters changed. So, there's a ton of suspicious things that she is involved in, and it's possible that she's cooperating and is going to come to a plea deal and then which will lead to even more indictments for Santos, or if she doesn't, she may be facing an indictment of her own.
If you could very quickly, Noah, talk about what he's charged with, these cases, but then also, does his announcement that he's running for re-election is in some way means he can get more money for himself, since part of this is the fraud of raising money for his election, but then he uses it for himself?
Yeah, so on the first part, there are basically 3 parts of this indictment. The first is the most serious. It basically represents that Santos was telling people that he was a 501c4 nonprofit supporting his campaign. He was going to some of his biggest donors saying, hey, give money to this group. They did. It turned out it was actually a company that he controlled based out of Florida, and then he siphoned the money out of the company and bought luxury goods, paid off his car, et cetera. So that's a pretty simple one. The other is that he applied for unemployment insurance during the pandemic while he was working at what the SEC has called a Ponzi scheme. So he got about $25,000 of unemployment insurance. And then the third part is that he allegedly lied on 2 congressional disclosure forms, misstating his income and assets. So those are the main things that are in the indictment there.
And Crew, what they've brought forward yesterday about the non-existence of his campaign treasurer?
Yeah, so he says, Nancy Marks basically was removed herself or stepped down as treasurer, and now you have this person, Andrew Olson, is the treasurer. Separately from Cruin in the past, I've tried to find Andrew Olson. If Andrew Olson is listening, I would love to speak with him. I have not found any evidence of who this Andrew Olson might be or if it is a real person, and Crew has not as well. I mean, Andrew Olson is not a treasurer for any other Republican campaigns or committees or anything in politics that and he's listed at an address that is a Santos family address in the past. So there is, just like so many parts of the Santos story, many questions about who Andrew Olson is, if that is his real name.
We have 10 seconds. Which comes first? Election day, when he's running, or trial or settlement?
I'd say trial or settlement, and I think George Santos is really hoping to retain the life rights so that he can sell this. He mentioned a book yesterday.
Noah Lanard, reporter at Mother Jones. We'll link to your pieces, including your latest Santos indictment leaves many lies, mysteries, and scandals unaddressed.